Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. It is the last and final installment of our NFL Division Preview Series this fine off season, and it's the NFC West, far from the best for last, but maybe a bona fide contender to come out of the much maligned NFC. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, you've made it to the finish line, at least the preseason finish line, as it pertains to the ordeal we go through to preview all 8 divisions in extensive detail.
We've made it to the finish line. Leave no man behind.
It's a good point. You did suffer through a little bit of adversity. You had some of the sniffles. You got the first ailment out of the way, hopefully. So I'm proud of you to get to this point. But it is always a labor of love, to say the least. It'll be exciting when we get to flip the gears and start talking about some of the marquee Week 1 matchups. 4 teams on the docket, one of which we previewed a little bit and kind of peeled back the curtain a bit on the Arizona Cardinals. But one final thing before we get into these 4 teams themselves. Preseason football, I mean, as someone who's done this as long as you have, what do you look for? And is there anything valuable that ever comes out of the preseason other than teams being a little bit buttoned up? Are there certain things, overall general sentiments with the 3 pregame schedule that we see now?
You have to be careful. I mean, your eyes can lie to you if you don't understand that teams have different agendas, right? I mean, there's teams that are just trying to get healthy and make it to Week 1. There's other teams that are out there clearly trying to win these games. So from that perspective, I would not really view things result-oriented or based, but I definitely am keeping an eye on specific players, right? Depth, especially when there's injuries. I mean, it's a sport of attrition. You got to figure out who's able to step in there. The other thing that I'm looking for is a lot of the coaching changes, right? They're implementing their schemes. So you do have a good idea of what is potentially coming down the chute, specifically to one of our bets on an earlier preview podcast. We are hearing a team is going to open some things up. What are they doing personnel-wise? What are they doing formationally? Stuff like that is what we're looking for. Pace and tempo. You get new coaches in, new offensive coordinators. You hear things, right? They're going to be a little bit more run-oriented. We're going to huddle up instead of playing from the shotgun. And you're able to confirm some of those things because that's what they're running in the preseason, trying to get everyone acclimated to the new system. The scoreboard, other than our bankroll, is fairly irrelevant in what it means to projecting the future.
I was going to say, the amount of scoreboard watching that goes on in the preseason and the fan bases out there, all 32 of them, or maybe 31 coming into this season, brimming with optimism about what they're going to get every single Sunday through the fall never ceases to amaze me. And apparently when you have a starting quarterback that goes out there and leads touchdown drives on all of his preseason drives, people want to start calling one particular team a Super Bowl dark horse contender to go out there despite their win total sitting at 8.5 and being the 4th favorite in their division. But I digress completely, Payne, as we get into the first team that we have on the schedule today, the Arizona Cardinals. And while we talk about all fan bases being optimistic, this is one that's probably not booking their hotels or flights to Las Vegas for the middle of February. And as far as the Cardinals' overarching odds, their win total 4.5, heavily shaded to the under, even more so than it was when we recorded the AFC West on Thursday. When you look at the Cardinals' odds to win the division, one of the biggest long shots in the league, right around 30-1, and their odds to win the NFC, well over 100 to 1, and you can find them upwards of 300 to 1 to win the Lombardi Trophy. Arizona, new head coach Jonathan Gannon takes over. This is a rebuild that apparently isn't going to take just one season, and the Cardinals are showing signs of being patient. They dealt away a few key pieces at the end of camp. They cut ties with DeAndre Hopkins to take the dead cap hit this year. No real reason, at least on the surface, to rush Kyler Murray back from his torn ACL. And when you look at what general manager Monty Ossenfort has done, not been shy about stripping the roster, trading down on draft day to accumulate a little bit more draft capital. This is a Cardinals team that plans to field the second cheapest defense in the NFL, ahead of only another team that we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show. And when you look at some of the metrics from positional spending, when you're not spending on a group, you can't go out there and treat it as a money ball approach that this group is going to be a top 5 performing unit. Don't want to spend a ton of time on the Arizona Cardinals, Payne. I know their fans may be a little bit unhappy with our approach for this team, but when you look at this group offensively and defensively, so much transition, so many unfamiliar faces on the defense. I'm not sure where exactly you want to take it or how you go about gauging success for Arizona under first-year head coach Jonathan Gannon in 2023.
I think we can get to the offense and defense quickly, but where you just led me is perfect because this is about Jonathan Gannon. And, our stance on the Cardinals is already out there. This is more of an overview, but specific to Jonathan Gannon, I was surprised by the hire. What say you?
I'm right there with you. I wasn't sure that was the direction I might have gone in, but Arizona apparently loved everything that they heard in the interview process, which we came to find out wasn't exactly spot on, dead balls accurate in terms of the way he represented himself in the interview room leading up to being offered this particular head coaching gig.
That was the word. And for me, Gannon a little bit overhyped, and I think we might be partly responsible for that hype. If you remember years ago, we kind of banged the table about what Gannon was doing behind the scenes for the Colts defense. And at that time, Gannon was a defensive backs coach, but he was responsible for that 2019 Sunday Night Football game plan that upset Mahomes and the Chiefs in Arrowhead. And our source had said that Gannon was very much involved in the weekly game plans for those Colts defenses. Okay, awesome. Then you have Shane Steichen hire Gannon to be his defensive coordinator in Philly. Year one under Gannon, the Eagles' defense got substantially worse, went from 15th to 25th in defensive efficiency year over year. Last season, the Eagles' defense made huge strides, right? 6th in defensive efficiency. Give credit to where it's due. Awesome, right? Solid improvement. But everything was in Jonathan Gannon's favor. The Eagles were all in. It was Super Bowl or bust. Howie Roseman effectively gave Gannon the black card and just said, go spend, because Jalen Hurts was making peanuts. They went out and got a lockdown corner in James Bradbury before the season. And you know what? Might as well add a 6th edge rusher to be safe. Let's go trade for Robert Quinn. And then, halfway through the season, it's trouble stopping the run with $80 million Javon Hargrave and Hall of Famer Fletcher Cox and the 13th overall pick, Jordan Davis, who's 340 pounds and can only play the run. Howie said, no problem, JG, take the black card again and go sign, Sue and Linval Joseph hours apart. Anything that Jonathan Gannon wanted, he got. And, I can tell you this, it's think about the help he got on the field, too, not just with the players being added. The Eagles scored the 7th most first-half points in NFL history. Philly led at halftime last season by a total margin of 121 points. You combine those halftime leads with the schedule of offenses the Eagles defense played, and you're kind of just shaking your head in shock. The Eagles played the 2nd easiest schedule of passing offenses, 5th easiest schedule of pass blocking offensive lines. Now tell me, when your offense builds leads like Philadelphia's did, the opposing offense basically becomes extremely predictable, and Gannon's defense has the fortune of facing horrific pass offenses when they're forced to play catch up and everyone knows what's coming. And so to me, there wasn't a ton of great stuff there, especially when you parse out any competent offense pretty much just giving the Eagles the business throughout the course of the year. So it just kind of shocks me that within 25 months, Gannon went from position coach to one of the 32 most prestigious jobs in the world. And then the first big moment as head coach, it's comes off more awkward than Kendall Roy. That was the most weird, bizarre intro that I have ever seen. Now, I will say this because Cardinals fans are probably throwing up at this moment. I think the positive here is Gannon actually has a chance to be competent because he's set up for success. Steve Keim's gone. Draft capital in 2024 is absolutely nuts. The Cardinals control the draft. I mean, you got 2 first-round picks, 5 picks in the first 3 rounds, and based on projections, right? I mean, Arizona's got the early inside track for Caleb Williams or Drake May, and then you already have a massive asset at quarterback. Whether you keep Kyler or move off him and add more draft capital and free up more dollars, salary cap situation's already in a good spot. And for Gannon, right, being a defensive-minded head coach, it's awesome that you're in the NFC and you don't have to face Mahomes and Burrow and Allen and Herbert and Lamar multiple times a season.
Yeah,
defensively, you kind of mentioned some things. Do we want to touch on that pretty quickly?
Yeah, if you want to go through real quick. I mean, clearly they made some moves, so it's not exactly a who's who on the defensive side. And when you look at some of the players...
I'm going to cut you off. Verbatim, tell me your text out loud from yesterday.
I quoted I quoted Major League, and I'm going to butcher the quote for one of my favorite movies. Who are these fucking guys? I mean, that's kind of how I feel about the Arizona Cardinals defensively when you look at the players that have been lost in the offseason.
I think it's an uphill battle. I mean, you're not going to have the luxury of Gannon, and his defense playing with leads. And the Cardinals face a top 5 schedule of offenses, one of the most difficult schedules of run offenses, and the starting defensive line for Arizona is head-scratching. And you think about this group, it's L.J. Collier, Fotu, and Ledbetter. Collier was a first-round pick in 2019. He's played nearly 1,100 career snaps, and those snaps are so far below replacement level, it is nuts. I mean, Collier's hit the quarterback on 2% of his pass rush snaps. Fotu was a 4th-round pick in 2020. He's played almost 1,200 career snaps. He's played those snaps to a 38 grade. Remember, right? 60 is replacement level. Jonathan Ledbetter was an undrafted free agent in 2019. He's a try-hard guy. Great dude. Was with the Dolphins for a few seasons. 336 career snaps over 4 seasons, and Ledbetter's hit the quarterback a grand total of 2 times. And apparently Arizona is going to stick with a 3-4. There was discussions in the offseason about moving to a 4-3, but you could make the case on paper this is one of the worst 3-down fronts in NFL history. It is that bad. Now, it's on paper. Things can change. You even look at the 4 linebackers. It's Collins, Gardeck, White, and Barnes. The first year Collins was implemented as a full-time starter last year, over 1,000 snaps. He regressed below replacement level. Gardeck's a 2018 undrafted free agent, has never been a starter. Barnes, 2020 undrafted free agent, over 1,000 career snaps. Not good. Metrically, Kazir White's the best of the bunch. He's average. And then the secondary. Marco Wilson is the Cardinals' starting outside corner on one side. He's allowed 67% of targets to be caught in a 105 passer rating in his 1,500 career-plus snaps. Then you look at who's starting opposite him. It's going to be the rookie 6th-rounder, Ketrell Clark. 532 cornerbacks played at least 175 snaps in college last season. Clark graded out 454th. I think Antonio Hamilton's solid, long, physical, solid nickelback. He's going to be 31. He's never played more than 420 snaps in a season. Budda Baker is a nice safety, not as good as the contract. He's demanded a trade. It would not be surprising if a contender at some point comes in and acquires him. Jalen Thompson, a solid safety. Offensively, just quickly, everyone's learning a brand new system, right? What did we talk about when you're learning a brand new system? Typically about 8 to 10 weeks to implement it. By that time, season could be done because we're not sure what is going to happen with Kyler Murray here. But my understanding is the Cardinals are going to play slower, huddle more emphasis on the run game and 2 tight end sets. Likely you're going to see the quarterback under center a little bit more. And so I think that's going to take time for everyone to acclimate to Drew Petzing's new offense. When does Kyler Murray return? Timeline has variance, but
maybe not at all.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, there was a report that said, "Hey, Arizona's telling people that Kyler's going to sit out this year." I didn't really trust the source. Felt kind of hot takey, but it's possible, right? When does he return? Especially if the offense is slow starting. I mean, this typically isn't the offense. If it's going to be ran how we're seeing in preseason and what Drew Petzing has come from, not typically the Kyler Murray type of system. But again, there's variance there, and Kyler's come out and said, hey, I'm not returning until I'm 100%, and I'm confident. So when does he return? Then you just look at the weapons, like Hollywood Brown's your number 1. To me, that's pretty scary. 86th in route win rate. I am excited about Rondale Moore. I know we both loved him at Purdue. We've kind of been waiting for that breakout. It's possible it could happen in year 3, although the quarterback situation probably doesn't lend itself to that. But Rondale Moore isn't a number 1. Michael Wilson's a rookie. Zach Pascal has never been anything more than a 3 in a bad Colts receiver group. Zach Ertz, 33 and recovering from an injury. Hopefully we see more Trey McBride at tight end. He played well as a rookie down the stretch. I like DJ Humphries at left tackle. Paris Johnson, right, 6th overall pick. But the interior line has serious questions with Elkinson and Hernandez and Froholt. I don't see a ton of talent. Guys are returning from injury, new schemes implemented, schedule difficulty increases. You can say all the right things, but at what point does the focus become the 2024 draft? And that's kind of my thought process.
Yeah, I imagine the focus for the 2024 draft is starting even before they take on the Washington Commanders in week 1 for a lot of the reasons that you highlighted. I mean, having the Houston Texans first round pick, assuming the Texans struggle with a rookie quarterback in their own right, no reason to believe that Arizona can have 2 picks inside the top 6 or 7 if things were to go the right way, allowing them to get building blocks for the future. And to your point, moving on from Kyler Murray, if that's indeed how they feel, given the scheme and fit or lack thereof with a slightly more diminutive quarterback where his legs are probably his best asset. Decision-making inside the pocket leaves a lot to be desired. So we'll see exactly what we get out of the Arizona Cardinals, but sometimes you have to rip a house down to the studs before you can build it back. And right now for the Cardinals, it's a team that needs to figure out their identity, and more importantly, a team that has to figure things out in their home games. We used to talk about this being one of the more underrated home field advantages in the entire NFL, but since 2018, the Cardinals are 11-29-1 at home, easily the worst home record in the NFL, and they've only covered 16 out of those 41 games, not exactly lining people's wallet where it matters most at the betting window. But Payne, the Arizona Cardinals may not be the only team in rebuild mode in the NFC West this season, because the Los Angeles Rams have a little bit of star power, but not a whole heck of a lot else on this roster. And when we look at this Rams team overall, it's reflected in some of those numbers. We gave out their win total way back when. It's moved more than a full game right now, sits at 6.5, heavily shaded to the under. 10-1 makes them third favorites in the division. And when you look at their odds to win the NFC, right around 40-1 and close to 100-1 to win the Lombardi Trophy. In 2022, the Rams had a defense that counted $96 million against the cap. It was top 10 in the league and cost $105 million in cash, which was in the top half as well. In 2023, they're spending only $59 million in cash, 32nd in the league on a roster that counts $63 million against the cap, also 32nd. So what do to go out there and try and bolster this defense and figure out some depth? Well, they drafted 14 players this year and spent the 32nd most amount of money, and for those counting at home, 32nd dead last in free agency. So not exactly what they're doing to bolster their roster. It's a team projected to be underdogs in nearly every game other than when they play the Arizona Cardinals. But they do bring back a veteran under center and quarterback Matthew Stafford, assuming he can stay healthy. But Payne, when you have an aging quarterback and you have a patchwork offensive line, it is far from the perfect recipe to protect a quarterback who ended last season prematurely, not because of the elbow issues he started the season with, but a spinal contusion that kept him on the shelf for the final 8-9 games.
I think you would trade a Super Bowl for last season and what's potentially about to transpire this season, right?
Yeah, I think you have to. I mean, it's the Miami Marlins approach. Win a World Series every 15 years. It's better than being irrelevant for stretches. And I will say one thing about the Rams before we get into some of the individuals. The Rams knew that. It's not like they're shying away from this. They said that their approach to go out there and acquire impact players, there was going to be a time where they had to pay the piper. It's starting to arrive in earnest now.
And the Super Bowl run was impressive. The stars shined. The elite talent played to peak. And we knew it was a team with little depth. And I think what we discussed that year heading into the season was like, hey, you're going to have some injury luck, catch a couple breaks. And they did. They were one of the healthier teams in football. But even the year they won the Super Bowl, I was looking at our numbers this morning. We had the Rams finish 6th in our power rating the season they won the Super Bowl. So like right off the bat, last year we were projecting, regression. And then what couldn't happen happened, right? It was a team that was built with little depth, got just crushed by the injury bug. The Rams were the most injured offense in the NFL. You look at some of the key players, too. Premium injuries with Stafford and Kupp. Akers was still recovering from a torn Achilles. The offense led the league in over 100 games missed to injury. The offensive line set a record for the most adjusted games lost ever. And I think one of the reasons we're not projecting an immediate bounce back is the early season numbers when guys were healthy weren't very good. You look at Cooper Kupp and Stafford together last season, the first 9 weeks, the Rams offense was still 27th in efficiency. All the wear and tear on Stafford, really started to show. To your point, it wasn't just like the elbow. We had this injury over here, the back injury, the spine injury, you name it. He was just going through a bunch of stuff. But what we had kind of projected coming into the season was the elbow was a little bit worse than what was being led on, right? There was a quiet procedure done. It was followed by injections. There was an announcement of Stafford having elbow tendonitis. And then finally, all of the lack of throwing in camp and joint practices, McVay had to come out and said, it's abnormal for a quarterback, right? This is not normal at all. But it's something that Stafford's going to have to deal with. And so you saw some limits in his throwing every week. And now you look like Stafford's approaching age 36. We saw all of the stable metrics regress. Clean pocket, without play action, from inside the pocket, all top 10 metrically the Super Bowl season, all bottom of the barrel last year. I would expect improvement from Stafford, right? You can't be as bad as he was last year. I'm hearing the arm does look better relative to this time last year. It's not prime peak Stafford, but substantially better than last year. Stafford's weapons are nice, right? Cooper Kupp is back healthy, but he is on the other side of 30 coming off, some severe injuries there. The box score numbers look good, but last season was the worst of Kupp's career in terms of route win rate. Van Jefferson is proven to be solid. Higbee, will be 31 soon, solid. Should see a lot of targets. I think Tutu Atwell is the guy to have the breakout season potentially. We did see Akers regain some form, went on a tear to end last season, top 10 in EPA per rush and success rate the final 6 games without any help around him. Offensive line, you kind of hinted is a problem, but I think it's better with health. Still not a plus unit by any stretch. If you're following this closely, the O-line's still a little bit unsettled right now. Looks like Joseph Noteboom lost his job at left tackle to an undrafted free agent in Alaric Jackson. Jackson played over 400 snaps last season between guard and tackle, graded out 84th out of 144 guards and tackles with at least 400 snaps. You have the rookie from TCU, Steve Avila, is going to start at left guard. Rumors are swirling that Coleman Shelton has won the starting center job over Brian Allen. Shelton was an undrafted free agent in 2018, roughly 1,000 snaps in 3 seasons with the Rams. They've been well below replacement level snaps. You have Ankrum, who's been the starting right guard all camp, 7th rounder in 2020, played 5 total snaps over that time. The word is that Noteboom might slide to right guard. We'll see there. You still have Rob Havenstein, probably the best of the bunch at right tackle, turned 31 recently, surrendered nearly a 7% pressure rate on pass blocking snaps last season. So even with better health, I think the Rams still have a below average offensive line, and we'll see kind of how all the moving parts kind of work together. But the Rams also project to face a top 5 schedule of defenses, a top 5 schedule of passing defenses, a top 10 schedule of pass rushing defensive lines. So things really, really are difficult this season. There's also some things that Sean McVay isn't doing that lead me to believe maybe he's a little checked out because they're so painfully obvious, and he was doing them just a couple seasons ago. I don't know why that's changed. For me, I fully believe this version of the Rams is closer to last season's team than it is the Super Bowl team. And you look, the Rams didn't beat a single team with a winning record last year, 0-8. And this year, the Rams are only favored in 4 games by an average of 2 points in those 4. Terrible schedule setup as well. The Rams face 4 opponents off their bye. It's the second worst net rest edge. And you kind of hit it perfectly, like all our loyal listeners are on this one already. We gave out under 7.5 back in May. It's like 6.4 right now. And then just last night, I don't know if you saw this, but specific to Matthew Stafford, his wife has a podcast, and she came out on that podcast and basically said he's having trouble getting along with the young guys. It's been the opposite of Tom Brady. Basically, he's not connecting with these guys, and Stafford says, hey, he goes into the locker room, tries to talk to these guys, and their head's in the phone. So he's having a very tough time communicating with the young kids on this roster. Probably not a positive.
No, never exactly what you want to hear going into a season. And Matthew Stafford doesn't owe it to anybody. I mean, he has a very decorated resume at this point. Super Bowl was one of the last things that he needed to accomplish there. And when you're working behind a makeshift offensive line and you're that age and you don't have mobility working in your favor, you wonder how long you want to sit there and deal with some of the potential abuse that could come down the pike. But if we're going to be glass half full, Payne, can Rams fans look to a defense that lost Greg Gaines and A'Shawn Robinson, lost Jalen Ramsey, Taylor Rapp, Nick Scott, and Troy Hill in the secondary? 4 players combined to play over 2,200 snaps in coverage last year. But Aaron Donald's still there. Other than that, however, this defense, I don't know if there's a lot of reason to be excited about what the Rams are going to bring to the table in this group. When you look at the front 7, they're going to need contributions from players like Byron Young and Kobe Turner. They're going to need the linebacking core to be more than just Ernest Jones, who you highlighted as a player that was flying under the radar as early as 2 seasons ago and what he'd be capable of doing. But I'm not sure Raheem Morris has the pieces to make this group competitive to offset any semblance of shortcomings that the offense could bring to the table.
I think that's fair. I don't see a ton here. On paper, this Rams defense has the potential to be bottom 5. We saw the dip from top 5 in 2021 to average last season, aside from Aaron Donald. I mean, Les Snead is trying to get the Rams out of salary cap hell, and most of that purge has come on defense. I mean, Ramsey's gone, Bobby Wagner's out, Taylor Rapp, Leonard Floyd, Troy Hill, A'Shawn Robinson, the list goes on. And still, the Rams have over $72 million in dead cap. 43% of the money spent by the Rams organization this season won't be on players contributing on the field. The defensive line, to me, is going to have some issues. It's this rare combination of being extremely undersized while having trouble getting pressure off the edge without blitzing. It's pretty clear the staff knows this. You watch preseason games or read joint practice reports, the Rams have been forced to play 5 down fronts on early downs. And then they kind of morph back to what they want to be is a 4-2-5 in known passing situations. Raheem Morris, when you look at his coverage schemes, plays a lot of quarters, cover 3, very little man or press. So if you're not getting pressure and you're playing soft coverage, it becomes a fairly easy completion at this level, right? So it's not surprising the Rams were 28th in passing success rate allowed last season. I just look at the front 4 talent-wise past Aaron Donald. It's Marquise Copeland, 454 career snaps, 2% pressure rate. I mean, he's hit the quarterback once on 181 pass rush snaps, and word is he struggled to hold up at the point of attack in a camp. Byron Young, the 77th pick, rookie. Apparently going to be a day 1 starter on the edge. I mean, Young was replacement level for the Vols last season. What I am hearing is the 2 best guys that have consistently performed and got the most pressure off the edge in camp are undrafted guys. Keir Thomas out of Florida State and Zach Van Valkenburg, right? You have Michael Hoyt, looked serviceable down the stretch last season, but he's an undrafted guy too. I like the rookie Kobe Turner inside. Not sure if he's ready to be a full day 1 starter next to Aaron Donald, but I mean, Kobe's a solid piece down the line for sure. Linebacker room, to your point, a little bleak. Ernest Jones is the best of the bunch, looking for that year 3 leap. Has the talent, fun to watch, kind of flies around, but he has been just a replacement level through 2 seasons when the dust finally settled. Roseboom is another undrafted player, special teams guy last season, likely the starter heading into this year. The Rams secondary has a piece or two that I like. I mean, Kobe Durant saw his snap share increase from week 13 onward, allowed 0.4 yards per coverage snap. I think Durant's a nice nickel corner in year 2. Jordan Fuller had a great 2021 season at safety. Injuries cut last year short, contract year. So I would expect a little bit of a tick up there. The Rams brought back John Johnson a couple weeks ago after a rough stint in Cleveland. He's still working his way back into football shape. If you get the 2020 version of John Johnson, that helps a lot. But you look at the potential tandem of outside corners, it's Akilla Witherspoon and Darian Kendrick. I mean, wowzers, right? I mean, Kendrick played like you would think a rookie 6th rounder would, graded out corner 133 out of 136 qualifiers last season. You look at corners with at least 400 snaps, Kendrick was 3rd worst in adjusted yards allowed per coverage snap. Witherspoon was a decent depth piece for the Steelers last season. Now I think the plan is for him to be a full-time starter for the first time in his 7-year career. Witherspoon allowed 76% of targets to be caught in a 128 passer rating last season. So to me, you know, the talent cupboard is really bare after Aaron Donald, and you just kind of start to wonder there. I know he said he came back because he couldn't finish how things went last season, but there's always that talk of potential retirement looming and getting a little bit up there in age, and there's not a lot of help around him, and it becomes a little bit easier to scheme to stop one guy on the inside. So to me, it's just ugly stuff ahead for the Rams defense.
Yeah, this is a team that, like we said at the top, you give away everything you possibly can to win a Super Bowl. It's an opportunity that doesn't come around often. You need things to break the right way, and the Rams were extremely fortunate to get the job done when they did. They're now paying the price for it, and this feels like a full-blown rebuild as they look to identify the players that'll be around for the next generation, whether it's with Sean McVay at head coach or should they go in a different direction. One thing we didn't even talk about at the top with Matthew Stafford, if he gets banged up early, I'm not sure anybody's running, even the president of the Stetson Bennett fan club, to trust Stetson Bennett against NFL defenses, at least right out of the gates with the offensive line, knowing he doesn't have the talent around him that he had at Georgia. So we'll keep...
Not a great showing against Denver.
No.
Trying
to force balls into narrow windows against NFL defense is a little bit of a different dynamic than some of the second-tier teams in the SEC that he got to play. But hey, look,
save your shots for TCU this Thursday.
Hey, Stetson got to answer the bell when he stepped up in class, and maybe the light bulb will go on as an NFL quarterback, but I'm not sure he projects to a top 10 guy at any point during his illustrious NFL career. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod, and we'll remind you from now until the season starts, and even when the season is underway, to sign up for the Bet the Board newsletter. Comes out Fridays throughout the course of the fall. Should you happen to miss a podcast or articles that we circulate, it is the single best reminder so you can play catch up before the games get here over the weekend, oftentimes carrying additional best bets and some other nuggets that we don't get to on the podcast. Absolutely free. Encourage you to sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. From two teams, Payne, in full-blown rebuilding mode in the NFC West, to two teams that may have aspirations of winning the division or maybe a little bit more. And we can start with the San Francisco 49ers, who are rightful division favorites at a price just shy of 2-1 to win the division. When you look at San Francisco's win total, it's upwards of 10.5 shaded to the over. Some of the 11.5s that were out there have been cleared out of the market. There are some alternate prices if you do shop around. 49ers to win the NFC plus 350 thereabouts, and to win the Lombardi Trophy, a price just north of 7-1. This is a team that projects in favorites almost every time they're going to put their cleats on this season, maybe other than their road trip to Philadelphia late in the season. But before we get into some of the offensive and defensive expectations we have for Kyle Shanahan's bunch, did want to get your take on the trade that went down late last week. Trey Lance officially moving on. Instead of being relegated to third string on the 49ers depth chart behind Sam Darnold, heads off to Dallas for a mid-round draft pick. And the Niners, in my opinion, deserve a ton of credit. They handled this situation with class. They didn't throw Trey Lance under the bus, saying that it was all on him, saying that they failed a young kid, never got him the reps, never gave him a chance to assert himself as a quarterback. But wanted to get your take on the Trey Lance experiment in San Francisco and where it went wrong, and what the 49ers are doing getting out from under this earlier rather than later.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. Obviously, you gave up the farm to move up to 3 to get him, and you get a little egg on your face. But I think you said it perfectly. Is a lot of times as men, we hold on to something just to prove that we were not wrong. But Kyle Shanahan and Lynch decided to pull the Band-Aid off and get some egg on their face. And Kyle Shanahan stood up at that podium like a freaking G and said, hey, it's on me. And I think he took a bullet for a lot of people, including Trey Lance and John Lynch. And we've had this conversation in the past. There's been people that have tried to refute it. This was not Kyle Shanahan's guy. And it's very obvious if you, one, get decent information, or two, just follow the type of quarterback that Kyle Shanahan has had in the past, right? It's Kirk Cousins. It's Brian Hoyer in Cleveland. It's Matt Ryan. It was going to be Mac Jones. It was never going to be Trey Lance for him. So the positive is now you move on. You get a little something back with a 4th rounder. You get the rookie contract off your books because this is a team that has some salary cap issues, and you move forward with Brock Purdy as a 7th rounder. And now you just go win some ball games and hope people forget a little bit, Winning cures
It is
all.
no doubt the best deodorant out there for organizations should you squander some of your draft capital. And, of course, you mentioned Brock Purdy. He wasn't, well, I guess he was able to finish the game against the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC Championship, albeit with a torn UCL. Appears to be trending in the right direction, has asserted himself as the starting quarterback. And Kyle Shanahan, as he always does, deserves a ton of credit for putting together a game plan that suited Brock Purdy's skill set and abilities, allowed him to stay ahead of the down and distance. They got the ball to their playmakers in space, and defenses were constantly guessing in terms of what Mr. Irrelevant and Brock Purdy was going to do leading that particular offense. There are all sorts of questions about how he'll look when he's under pressure, what the situation will be if Brock Purdy has to lead his team back from deficits, but this is a 49ers offense that has made it very quarterback friendly. Given the names that you highlighted there are a lot of things and safeguards put in place. There are some weapons around him in Christian McCaffrey, who they acquired last year, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, trending down but still a very physical blocker and has been known for one of those big performances from time to time. The offensive line, Trent Williams, an absolute horse and a building block, going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer when his time is ultimately up, but there are some questions there. When you look at this 49ers offense as a collective, where do you see some of their strengths and where do you have some of your major concerns for a team a lot of people are picking to be the class of the NFC?
Everyone knows how we feel about Kyle Shanahan. I think he's one of the best offensive minds to ever do it. Don't necessarily love all of the decisions. You scratch your head sometimes how an offensive coordinator can be so conservative in these plus EV go for it situations. But as an offense, right, scheme, play design, play calling, Shanahan's great. And everything that we're hearing is all systems go for Brock Purdy. And the two questions that I reached out to my 49ers source about just this past Saturday night, and the conversation leaked into Sunday morning, was one, can Purdy make all of the throws? And the response was, I haven't seen any limitations. And, does this mean Purdy's 100%? Probably not, but he's getting damn close. And then the second question I asked was, knowing how small the sample size was for Purdy last season, has there been any erratic play this camp to where you could potentially point to a regression? And their answer was emphatically no. So I thought that was pretty helpful. And I think the interesting part here is Kyle Shanahan's offense doesn't ask its quarterbacks to effectively crank the lever to or past 100 all that often. You look, 37 quarterbacks dropped back at least 200 times last season. Purdy was 34th in air yards. Shanahan's offense is very much designed for yak. Be decisive, get the ball out quick, deliver it accurately so pass catchers can run after. And Purdy was terrific at that last season. All of the stable metrics were very much in line with Jimmy G. Jimmy G also not a quarterback like Trey Lance, by the way.
No, very different attributes
metrics.
Physically.
Yeah, so now you kind of go down this list, and I'm taking myself off track here, but it's Kirk Cousins, it's Brian Hoyer, it's Matt Ryan, it's Jimmy G, it's Brock Purdy, and there's Trey Lance. One of these quarterbacks is not.
Well, maybe
others,
Kirk Cousins
right?
factors into the future plans for the 49ers as well. Wink, wink, nod, nod, potentially.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I think if Brock Purdy has a very good year, he's the guy, and I think trading Trey Lance kind of puts a stamp on that. But when you look, going back to last year's, the stable metrics for Purdy were in line with Jimmy G. The variance metrics were better than Jimmy G, right? Throwing under pressure and things of that nature. And you look from the time Purdy entered that Week 13 game against the Dolphins, Brock's first 8 games, the 49ers were the most efficient offense in the NFL, the most efficient pass offense. Now, the schedule does get a little bit more difficult this season. The 49ers faced a bottom 5 schedule of passing defenses last year. That'll move to above average this season, right? For the third highest increase in difficulty. I'm interested to see what CMC and Shanahan's offense looks like for a full season, right? There's some stuff that you just can't cook up in the middle of the year that you can do in an offseason. So I think that'll be interesting to see. I know a lot of people were skeptical of the McCaffrey trade because of the stigma of running backs right now. But CMC, still in his prime. He was going to an offense that values running more than just about any offense in the year 2023. And I think the results were staggering. If you look, before CMC arrived in San Francisco, the 49ers were 26th in rushing efficiency. From week 8 onward, with McCaffrey integrated a little bit more, San Francisco was 3rd in rushing efficiency. You look at the backs, right? You got CMC, you got Mitchell, but those guys are going to have to be good, right? Because the schedule of run defenses goes from 30th to roughly league average. So again, another uptick in run defenses. The biggest question for me about the 49ers offense is depth. That's really something we talked about off air, Todd. The overarching theme of San Francisco's roster, aside from probably 2 position groups, is depth. Offensive line, to me, has a couple holes, but it's really one injury away from being unplayable. There's no depth. The scheme and Trent Williams possibly being the best offensive lineman ever really camouflages the reality here. The 49ers lost their starting right tackle, Mike McGlinchey, in free agency. The 4 starters from left guard to right tackle are Aaron Banks, Jake Brandell, Spencer Buford, and Colton McKivitz. None of those players have averaged a replacement level season for their careers. So the hope is that there's some surge in play because you have 3 young guys at, kind of a 25-year-old average between Banks and Buford and McKivitz. And you kind of just see them kind of grow together, and the line becomes a little bit more cohesive. But again, there's not much depth there. The 3 core pass catchers are really good, right? Ayuk, Debo, and Kittle. Past that, some serious questions, in the way Debo and Kittle play, certainly leads to higher injury risk. Ayuk feels like he's just ready to kind of become a horse.
As long as he stays out of Kyle's doghouse. As long as he stays out of Kyle's doghouse, he'll be all right.
Number 3 in target separation last season. Didn't matter which QB it was for the 49ers. Collectively, when San Francisco quarterbacks targeted Ayuk, it led to a 117 rating. Debo, if you've read those reports, in the best shape of his life. I think the 49ers need him to get back to like the 2021 form where he averaged nearly 3 yards per route run. That dipped last season to 1.7. George Kittle turns 30 soon. Need him to get back to that 2019, 2021 form. We kind of saw a little bit of a dip last year. 1.7 yards per route run, lowest since his rookie season. Just the way he plays the game, just so physical. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if he wore down a little bit earlier in his career than obviously like a Travis Kelce, who is more of a pass catcher. I like the frontline players. In fact, I love them, right? And for Kyle Shanahan's system, you'd be hard-pressed to find better fits than Purdy and CMC and Debo and Ayuk and Kittle and Trent Williams. There's just no depth, and the schedule gets tougher, and that's why we've seen some money against the 49ers in the market with their win total, months ago being 11.5, and now I would say consensus is about 10.5 right
It's
now.
always interesting because people, I think, when they look at it, not saying professional bettors, obviously, but the casual fans and people in media, they look at the starting 22 and they go, hey, we really like these rosters. But what happens once one of those first dominoes goes down? And all the time we talk about, if a team loses their starting quarterback, it's not that simple and straightforward. It's why you have to be able to adjust on the fly if some of the depth pieces in the trenches aren't there or available. Teams' fortunes and fates can crater relatively quickly. Defensively, Payne, when we look at the change as far as defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans, we know, is taking the head coaching job for the Houston Texans. Steve Wilks steps in. Schedule going to get more difficult in 2023 than what they dealt with last year. You look at some of the underlying metrics, and that suggested that the 49ers were very good where they needed to be. But you begin to dig into it. You watch some of their games. They were vulnerable in the defensive backfield in terms of giving up big plays. They secured that a little bit more last year than what we saw 2 seasons ago, but not a ton of depth in the cornerback room. We look elsewhere, though, but I don't want to also ignore the 800-pound gorilla in the room. That, of course, being Defensive Player of the Year Nick Bosa, who hasn't been with the team, still looking to leverage his situation for a bigger and better contract. And you can understand why. If Nick Bosa isn't out there, especially early in the season, do you have the confidence that the 49ers have people that can rush the passer? And when so much of it is built along the defensive line and them being disruptive, where do you see this 49ers defense compared to where it's being projected and forecasted as far as mainstream media is concerned?
John Lynch says the deal's getting done before week 1. So I think we take him at his word. Listen, if you're familiar with the Bosa family, it's all about business. Always has been. South Florida kid, and that family handles things to a T. They've done it prior to college. They've done it in the NFL. They've done a new contract with one of the Bosa brothers. Nick is better than Joey, and so that's where he's looking to get paid. And so I think ultimately, when you look at the 49ers and John Lynch, they're going to want to get this deal done, and you got about 13 days to do it before week 1. I think from my perspective here, and maybe starting where we finished, the other reason we've seen a little bit of under money come into this market is there's some holes on this defense. And I think if you view the 49ers defense through the prism of number 1 in schedule adjusted defensive efficiency last season, number 1 in early down defense, number 1 in EPA per play allowed, we're projecting drop off this year. And you lose your stud defensive coordinator in D'Amico Ryans, who left for the Texans. Steve Wilks is now the DC. He's good, just a different philosophy and mindset, right? You're going to see far more aggressive 49ers defenses, right? Like you're going to see more blitzing. You look at the last 2 seasons in Carolina, Wilks' defenses were 9th and 5th in blitz rate. The 49ers defense with D'Amico were 20th and 22nd. From what I see on paper, and again, the conversation I had with my 49ers source Saturday was like depth is a problem defensively, except at linebacker, where the staff is comfortable with 6-7 guys there. You have Fred Warner and Drake Greenlaw is probably the best linebacker tandem in the league. The 49ers D-line has some premium talent, brought in Javon Hargrave to play beside Eric Armstead and Nick Bosa. That's a mean 3 right there. And you look at Hargrave, like 13% pressure rate on pass rush snaps from the interior the last 2 seasons. It's a monster number. The question is, what else will Hargrave do now? I mean, he hasn't cared about stopping the run for the last 3 seasons. 42 run grade his last 2,000 snaps. 60 again is replacement level. Eric Armstead has to get back to his 2019 form when he's healthy. Kind of opens things up for everyone else. Bosa is, arguably the best edge defender in football. 18% pressure rate on pass rush snaps last season. Hit the quarterback 30 times. He was a plus edge setter as well. But past that 3, what is there? Like Omenihu and Ebikam are gone. So the depth along the D-line looks like Drake Jackson, Clellan Ferrell, Javon Kinlaw, and Kerry Hyder. Drake Jackson has a ton of talent, 2nd-round pick, added 21 pounds to his frame this offseason, but on 315 snaps, he's got a 7% pressure rate on pass rush snaps and just 8 tackles. So Jackson really needs to be good this season. Javon Kinlaw might be one of the larger misses. 14th overall pick in 2020. Word is he's now healthier and more confident, but he's played to a 49 grade the last 3 seasons. Clellan Ferrell. I mean, does the vibe of his entire career change with working with an elite D-line coach? I mean, who knows? But to this point, Clellan Ferrell has not been good. So, I mean, I don't know what's there. Kerry Hyder, replacement level player at best. I think when you look at him, 5 teams in 5 seasons, the second stop with the 49ers. So I have some questions there. Secondary depth is a problem, and I think the ability to cover past Travarius Ward is questionable. Metrically, Ward's an elite corner coming off his best season. Isaiah Oliver was brought in. He was thought to be one of the better slot corners the past few seasons in Atlanta, but he's struggling in camp so far. Tayshaun Gibson's 33, replacement level player on an average basis over his 11 seasons. Hufanga took a small step in year 2, solid player. Sometimes if you watch his game, he flies around so fast he takes himself out of plays or doesn't break down and tackle well. 16% missed tackle rate last season. A.J. Parker, undrafted free agent in 2021. He's played nearly 700 snaps over 2 seasons. Not good, and that's being kind. You have Lenore, a 5th-round guy, been below replacement level for 2 seasons. So, past the lack of depth and high-end ability to cover, like the secondary scares me. And then when you start to think about the changes that Wilk's going to make defensively with more blitzing, the corners are going to be exposed more. And then the schedule really ticks up as well. I mean, the passing offenses goes from 5th easiest last season to fringe top 10 in difficulty this year. And when you strip out the entirety of the passing offense and focus only on quarterback, the 49ers faced the easiest set of quarterbacks in the NFL last season. 22 different quarterbacks attempted a pass against the 49ers defense. 2 ended up finishing the season top 16. And, because of that weak quarterback schedule, It allowed the 49ers defense to finish second in EPA gained via turnover. So, again, we're projecting the 49ers defense to regress. The only way it doesn't, right, if like 5 things all happen simultaneously, right? Like Clelin Ferrell plays like he's the 4th overall pick, Javon Kinlaw plays like he's the 14th overall pick, and Hufanga takes the next step, and suddenly you find like the 2nd and even 3rd cornerback past Ward that can cover, and the 49ers don't suffer any injuries to like one of their core forward defenders. It's just, to me, Todd, like that's a lot to ask. It's a lot to project.
That's the whole thing. I mean, look, if we could forecast health in the NFL, it would make betting into the futures market significantly easier than what it currently is. We know that is the one X factor, so it pays to have star power up front, but you obviously want guys waiting in the wings that are more than capable of filling in. For the 49ers, if they're able to reach their ceiling and exceed odds makers' expectations, especially during the regular season, they're no doubt going to have to keep their starting 22 healthy, get Nick Bosa into the mix, and be ready to roll right out of the gates in week 1, where they'll go on the road to Heinz Field to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So clearly the team to beat in the division, but some concerns there if everything doesn't break the right way. If the 49ers aren't to win the NFC West, this is the team most likely capable of dethroning them, and that, of course, would be the Seattle Seahawks, who, when you look around the market, find themselves just north of $2 to win the division. Their win total up from where it opened at 8.5, shaded to the over. A lot of 9s predominant in the market. As far as the NFC and the Super Bowl, 12-1, 13-1 thereabouts for the conference, and right around 30-1 to win the Super Bowl. This is a team that made a commitment to Geno Smith. We saw them take, I don't want to call them veiled pot shots, but if you read between the lines for the way last year went, Pete Carroll talked about structure and a quarterback who worked off of the plays they called compared to some of the improvisation that we saw from Russell Wilson in the past. When you look at Seattle's schedule last year, yes, they played 17 games like everybody else, but just had to play 3 road games outdoors, and it wasn't exactly great when they got into those situations. But this was a team early in the year that caught the league by storm. Geno came out there. They showed big play potential, whether it was explosive runs or big plays in the passing game. I mean, this is a team that had 30 touchdowns on plays at 10-plus yards, the most in the NFL. No other team had more than 27. They had 29 offensive plays that gained 30-plus yards, tied for 4th most in the NFL, behind some of the elite teams in the 49ers, Chiefs, and Eagles. But Payne, before we get into some of the skill position players that I think you and I both like for Seattle, there are questions about Geno Smith. Yes, they made a commitment to him as a quarterback, but Geno Smith down the stretch didn't look like the same quarterback early on in the season. And I guess the $100 million question that all of us have for a quarterback who'd done a lot more working on the bench for the previous 6 to 7 years, what's the real Geno Smith? Is it the guy we saw take the league by storm, or was it a guy that we saw struggle maybe as more and more film got out on the journeyman under center?
Yeah, if we had that answer, boy, we'd be able to make some money on the Seahawks this year. But
that's why I come to you for the hard-hitting questions. I sure as shit don't have these answers.
I think first you got to give Geno, some praise for figuring it out. I can't remember a quarterback's career that started like this. I mean, just bottom of the barrel performances and team confidence for 8 seasons, completely out of the league in 2019. Even Seattle, right? Well, wasn't sure what Geno was, and he'd been under their watch since 2020. It's why Seattle demanded Drew Lock back in the Russell Wilson trade as competition to Geno. And it's why Seattle was only paying Geno $3.5 million last year. And so, for Geno to win comeback player of the year and finish 7th out of 33 quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation was totally left field. And the questions you have now are obviously the tough ones, and I think it's probably the best way to talk about Seattle ahead of the season. It's like, is Geno Smith's performance repeatable? Has everything around Geno improved? Have the other 3 teams in the West Division downgraded a little bit? And I think, even if the answer to all 3 is yes, they would need to be such a convincing yes, right? To where Seahawks exceed a new expectation, because the betting market's already pricing Seattle 3.5 games better year over year. And that's the way to look at this is, last year's win total was 5.5 juiced under. We're at 8.5 juiced over, a couple 9s in this market. It's like we all understand Seattle's improved, but now you have to effectively exceed the new market pricing. And that's a little bit tougher. Now, everything coming out of Seattle, if you've read or heard some pressers, is that Geno's better than ever. Your main point, though, is we saw a tail off last season. If you look at the first 14 games, Geno was 9th in EPA per play. Awesome. Final 4 regular season games, there were 22 quarterbacks that dropped back at least 100 times. Geno was 21st in EPA per play. The schedule of pass defenses Geno played last season, 4th easiest. The schedule of pass rushing defenses Geno played against last season, 4th easiest. Both increase in difficulty to around league average this season, and I think that's important to note because Seattle was 2-4 in games where Geno played an above average pass defense last year. Most of the luck factors went Seattle's way, right? Top 10 in injury luck, 8th in offensive line cohesion due to the lack of injuries. And specific to Geno and his individual luck, I think we kind of grazed over this in passing maybe when we were discussing the Bills and Josh Allen. But Geno Smith had 29 turnover-worthy plays last year, is the most in the league. But Geno only threw 11 interceptions. That plus 18 was the largest positive dichotomy for any quarterback in the league. Geno Smith was also one of the most sensitive quarterbacks to the blitz and pressure overall. And you start to look at who's calling the shots for Geno in Seattle's offense. It's Shane Waldron. We like him, right? He's into analytics. I can tell you that, right? I mean, he's very aggressive in improving himself as an offensive mind. But, he made a massive leap already, right? Made a huge leap in year 2 as a coordinator and play caller. Just through the kitchen sink at defenses. It's like, is there another notch there? And if there isn't, now we have defenses that understand what you're potentially trying to do here. The weapons are good, right? And hopefully the weapons prevent too much regression from Geno. I mean, DK Metcalf, just an absolute beast, finished 17th in route win rate, elite end zone target. And then you have Tyler Lockett, 5th in route win rate, still at, I believe age 31. Seattle went out, spent the 20th pick on Smith and Jigba. Unfortunately, he's going to miss at least the first couple weeks of the season with that broken wrist. But what's the offense look like when Smith and Jigba returns? Because Seattle used 3 wide receiver sets at the 6th lowest rate in the league. So are we going to get a complete 180 in personnel shift? And how is Pete Carroll, who's probably too hands-on, going to react to 3 wide receiver sets?
Petey, chuck and duck. Lean into your strengths, my friend, and enter the 21st century.
Well, that was the problem, is what Pete wanted to lean into last year was the ground game, and it wasn't overly efficient. And, the Seahawks had a very poor run offense, and that was against the 6th easiest schedule of run defenses. It was a combination of bad O-line play and poor running back production. If you look, Seattle's O-line finished 30th in adjusted line yards created, 24th in run block win rate. Kenneth Walker as a running back, just tried turning everything into a grand slam like it was college, and it basically led to a 31% success rate on Walker's runs. Nearly 24% of Walker's runs didn't gain a yard. So Kenneth ended up finishing running back 38 out of 42 in value over an average running back. It's why Seattle took Zach Charbonnet at 52 in this past draft.
Well, hey, one thing on running backs, that may not be why they took Zach Charbonnet. Seattle feels the need to draft a running back pretty much every single year to try and bring somebody in, figure out that they're not going to work, because Pete Carroll may spend way too much time watching a lot of these running backs play on Saturday. I'm convinced.
That's likely true, especially along the left coast there. Charbonnet, Pac-12 guy. So you kind of look at the offensive line. You have Abraham Lucas and you have Charles Cross. Both started as rookie tackles. They're extremely talented. You would expect year 2 bumps from both. So maybe the run blocking does improve. You add Charbonnet there for some competition, and Kenneth Walker learns to kind of take what's given to him as a runner rather than trying to hit the home run every single time. And you might see that the run game improve here. You do have Damian Lewis. He kind of turned the corner in year 3 as a guard. It's a contract season for him. Phil Haynes appears to kind of be the weak spot of Seattle's line. Evan Brown is replacement level center, but the starting rotation, I think has a chance to create some more running lanes. Seattle, though, the problem is they face the 2nd largest increase in schedule difficulty in terms of run defenses this season. So even if you get better O-line play, even if the running back play is better, do you necessarily see it metrically because the schedule of defenses against the run just becomes so difficult? The more I kind of deep dive Seattle, I just kind of kept coming back to thinking yep, team is vastly improved on paper, but if Geno regresses and the run game doesn't improve because of the schedule difficulty, it's nearly impossible for Seattle to exceed their new market price. If Geno somehow remains flat year over year and everything else around him is better, which we do expect, and you have two teams in the division that, who knows, at some point might not be focused on wins this season.
Fingers crossed.
Seattle could win. Yeah, Seattle could win 10 plus. Todd, I'm just not interested in tying up money for 5 months to find out if a quarterback who's performed well one time in 9 seasons can make it twice in 10. That's just my vibe.
I mean, look, and you mentioned the offensive line, and I think we talked about it in Seattle's preview last year. A little bit surprising for a team that wants to commit to running the football that they bring in two highly regarded offensive linemen in Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas that didn't come from run-heavy systems in college. I mean, one honed his craft in Washington State, which we knew wanted to air it out. One came from the air raid down there in Mississippi State, and you saw some of that reflected in the offensive line metrics. We'll see if it's different for Charbonnet, who probably doesn't want to hit home runs at the same rate as Kenneth Walker if he can be more efficient there. But to your point, talking about what the market's expectations are for Seattle, it feels like a team that may have a higher floor than it did in the past, but there's a very realistic chance if Geno regresses, this team can't get to their win total, but if he does play well, then maybe they're a little bit of a dark horse in the NFC. And part of that could be because of what they have defensively, where the offense grabs headlines. This team defensively may be a little bit better than I think a lot of people are led to believe. You do bring back, a number of key pieces, but at the same time, you're leading pass rushers and Uchenna Nwosu, Quentin Jefferson, and Shelby Harris are all gone. They generated 49% of the team's pressures in 2022. So what do? You go out and you bring in Draymond Jones from Denver, which should help a run defense that was bottom 10 in overall efficiency. A familiar face in Jaron Reed returns after 2 years away from his time in the Pacific Northwest. And you try and figure out exactly what some of these players are going to look like and how they're all going to fit together defensively. When you assess the Seahawks, you can start with any position group out there. Bobby Wagner back, Jordan Brooks injured, Devin Witherspoon comes in the draft from Illinois. What are your expectations for how Seattle's going to look on the defensive side of the ball?
We're seeing it the same way. I mean, you look last year, Seattle finished 26th in EPA per play allowed against the 8th easiest schedule of offenses, so not good. Our projections calling for improvement from Seattle's defense. I think, some questions up front probably determine the size of the improvement. Nwosu was a solid signing last offseason, right? Finally got a chance to be the man on the edge, and Nwosu delivered 14% pressure on pass rush snaps. Nwosu's best season defending the run as well. You still have Boye Mafe. He was the 40th pick and supposedly, has been the most improved player during this camp. We'll see. 5% pressure on pass rush snaps as a rookie, not good. Seattle spent a massive amount on Draymond Jones. He makes some splash plays, there's no doubt. 6th in pass rush win rate among interior linemen, had a ton of run stops, but Jones kind of takes himself out of position a lot being so aggressive, and so I don't think he's nearly as good, down to down metrically as the contract depicts. Jaron Reed returns to Seattle, replacement level player at best. It really feels like 4th round rookie Cameron Young is going to be an integral part inside. I like the pieces up front to be able to get after the quarterback. That was actually an area Seattle's defense was good at last season relative to everything else they were doing. They're 15th, creating pressure in less than 2.5 seconds. Throw in rookie 2nd round pick Derek Hall into the mix once healthy, and I think he probably got a nice group of edge rushers. Just a little bit inside makes me nervous because not a ton of great run defenders metrically, and that was the problem last year was stopping the run for Seattle. They finished 26th in EPA per rush allowed, and that was against a below average schedule of run offenses. We're projecting a top 5 schedule of run offenses this season. So it's more important that Geno is really good because one hand washes the other. If you're building leads, you're not going to face as many runs. Geno regresses a little bit, right? And the games are closer in neutral states, you're going to see more runs, and you're not able to camouflage that weakness as much. You do bring back veteran Bobby Wagner to the linebacker room. He, proved he could defy his age, played almost 1,100 snaps last year for the Rams and graded out the very best linebacker in football. I mean, he was great in the box, produced the 9th most positive tackles, finished 2nd in yards allowed per coverage snap, so he was good back there as well. I don't know what happened. I mean, Seattle thought he was finished, and you see some of the tape, and he still doesn't have the ability to go sideline to sideline like he once did when he was his prime, but he figured something out last year and was just amazing. Some questions past Bobby Wagner, though. Jordan Brooks hasn't played to the first-round pick status, 3 straight seasons of below replacement level play, tore his ACL late last season. Pete Carroll claims that Brooks is going to be ready for week 1. I think it'd be smart to have Jamal Adams put on a few pounds and get some reps at linebacker once he's fully healthy. Secondary, to me, looks poised to make the leap. Tariq Woolen was fantastic as a rookie in coverage, allowed 55% of targets to be caught, finished 3rd in adjusted yards allowed per coverage snap. You have Quandre Diggs at safety. He continues to just be a veteran leader back there. Devin Witherspoon has battled a hamstring injury in camp, but Pete Carroll says, the 5th overall pick's going to return to practice this week. To me, that's where the massive improvement comes, is Devin Witherspoon. Just going to start day 1 at nickelback, and he's just such a personality fit too, right? He's in your face, he's physical, he's a man cover corner. It's what Seattle wants to be. Julian Love became a full-time starter for the Giants last season, played over 1,000 snaps, had his best season, so he flourished when more was put on his plate. He's extremely versatile as well. The other outside corner job is probably the question mark. Michael Jackson and Trey Brown are battling each other for the starting job. I would think Michael Jackson kind of the inside track there, but the camp reports have been good about this side of the ball again. So yeah, I expect improvement here, Todd. Just the interior of the defensive line probably determines how large that jump in defensive efficiency is.
I appreciate the correction, by the way. I know I misspoke at the top saying Nwosu is gone. Clearly not the case, and this is what happens when you work off of chicken scratch notes from time to time. So always important to know which players are actually on these rosters that we're breaking down instead of putting your foot in your mouth like I've been known to do around these parts from time to time. 4 teams with very interesting objectives coming into the season in the NFC West, trying to figure out what their floors will be, what their ceilings will be, and quite frankly, what the organizational expectations are for all of them. But should any of them achieve their goals in one form or fashion, a lot of that will hinge on the overall health of their roster, something that we allude to quite frequently. And when you're talking about injuries, even before the season starts, it's important to get perspective from those folks who understand injuries better than anybody. You can follow Dr. Deepak Shona on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis, and he provides your full preseason injury breakdown for all things in the NFC West.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, thank you, my guys. Now, there's been no bigger name in the headline recently than JSN, Jackson Smith, and Jigba having wrist surgery. For a wide receiver, this is a really big deal. Now, fracture healing itself takes about 6 weeks, which would put us into week 4 of the season. But sometimes you can push up the return to about 5 weeks when the bone is mostly healed, and that would still be week 3 of the season. Now, Pete Carroll calling this a potential 3-week timeline, he tends to be very optimistic. We think this is one of those cases where that is probably more optimistic than realistic. For JSN, we wouldn't be surprised to see him out there week 3, week 4, but it would be more likely that they rest him through the week 5 bye, bring him back week 6. And part of that has to do with the fact that anytime you do surgery and immobilize the wrist, you're going to decrease that player's grip strength temporarily. And for a wide receiver, obviously the grip is the key to catching the ball. So for JSN, I think the most likely outcome here is week 6, but data says don't be surprised if he comes back week 3 or 4. Then we have his teammate on the offense, Kenneth Walker. Now, he's not injured right now. We're happy to say he looks like 100% going into the season. Just have to keep on our radar that he did have a groin strain earlier in the training camp period. And as a result, that will carry somewhat of an increased recurrence rate, probably about 15% as we go through the early part of the season. And then we have on the defense, the first round pick, Devin Witherspoon. He has been out with a hamstring issue. In the preseason, these are managed very conservatively, and so it's not terribly concerning to us that he has been out for almost the whole preseason. with that being said, he's got a good chance to return for week 1. These will carry a recurrence rate. It's a little bit lower because he is young, but that you're still going to be looking at a 10 to 15% type of issue. Then we have Jordan Brooks coming off the ACL. This is a pretty tough ask. He tore his ACL, had surgery at the end of January, so currently he is 8 months post-op. And he will be 8 months post-op for week 1. And as a result of that, you would expect the average on these to be closer to the 9 to 10 month range. And reality is, for a pass rusher, this is a really tough injury to come right back to full explosiveness on, because you need to be reactive, you need to be agile, and you need to be able to cut freely and trust that knee. Is it possible? Anything after 6 months is technically possible. So yes, very. But is it likely that he plays week 1? Not really. The data would suggest more likely October would be the return, but again, it's possible, and we could see him out there, probably with some limitation. And then we have a series of Rams who are luckily not injured currently, but we think had very injury-racked pass here. And that first one is Cam Akers. He, of course, tore his Achilles a couple years back. The Achilles is a brutal blow for running backs, especially. We've seen it end many careers. We've seen it cause 2-year performance dips for others. Cam Akers, towards the very end of last year, was averaging about 130 yards per game. And we have every reason to suspect, based on both the data and the statistics that he put up at the end of last year, that Cam Akers is probably just about back to normal. So we expect to return to his pre-injury trajectory. We do have some questions about that O-line, but we will talk about that in just a minute. Then we have Matthew Stafford. Now, he last year started the year out affected by an elbow UCL sprain, most likely, but an elbow injury. And then after that had a couple of concussions and what sounds very scary, a spinal cord contusion. Now, while each of those injuries is in itself a problem and, again, sounds pretty scary, they all heal well with non-operative treatment just given time. And he has had that. So Matthew Stafford, we do expect to start the season at 100%. Now, the key with Stafford, and his specifically with his durability or his injury risk going forward this year, he's a non-mobile pocket QB. So as you can imagine, his injury rate is directly tied in our data to the number of hits he takes. And so he's going to be very reliant on the offensive line to protect him substantially. And they don't project particularly well there. They have made some moves in the offseason to bolster their O-line, but we remain to be seen really how those play out. So again, Matthew Stafford, the concern is not really those prior injuries. If you are a fantasy player and you're looking to draft a high-risk, high-reward type of quarterback, like, for example, an Anthony Richardson, and you want stability early on, pairing him with a Matthew Stafford may be a great idea. Then you have Cooper Kupp. Now, Cooper Kupp, off of last year's high ankle, that is not projected to cause much of any impact for this year. Players, and especially wide receivers, do tend to return at full strength without an increased injury risk going forward. Now, the key with Kupp, though, he had this hamstring issue that was based on his return timeline. I think it's fair to say it was a grade 1 or a very minor hamstring, relatively speaking. But with that being said, it does, because of his age, carry a 15% re-injury risk over the first half of this season, so the first 8 weeks. And with Cooper Kupp, if you're looking at it for fantasy, we have him just a half step below the other top receivers, and those are the Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs. Because with Cooper Kupp, he's going to be reliant on Stafford, and Stafford, as we mentioned, is reliant on that O-line, which is a question mark. So with Cooper Kupp, we do have some limitations, but not really huge concerns based on his injury history itself. And then we have over in San Francisco, Brock Purdy. Now, he's returned very quickly, very efficiently, but in line with published protocols on this surgery. This is a relatively newer technique to repair rather than to replace the torn ligament. It's called the UCL. With Brock Purdy, while we don't have a ton of data on how quarterbacks specifically will do after this type of surgery, we do have a ton of data on baseball pitchers. And they have this surgery, they return at full strength, and with similar surgeries, they return with full control of their pitches. So in the baseball pitching motion, it actually requires more restraint on this ligament. It strains this ligament more than a football quarterback would. So if they can return at full strength and full control, full velocity, then we have very strong suspicions that an NFL quarterback, and specifically in this case Brock Purdy, will do the same. So overall, fair amount of optimism here, not too concerned about this surgery. And then we have a couple of injured Cardinals. Now, Kyler Murray, if you plug everything into our database and our algorithm, it predicts him returning around week 8. But this is a case where there's a pretty large range of outcomes. And the reason is that Kyler Murray has elite athleticism. You look at 90 plus percentile for his position. He is relatively young. And those factors predict a faster ability to return from your ACL, and the average being about 10 months. So those factors predict a faster return. But in the same database, if you take into account that the player has a large guaranteed contract and that he's going to likely be returning to a very bad team, those factors predict a slower return. So with Kyler Murray, we're kind of split in these opposite directions. And for that reason, the algorithm is pointing out week 8, but it gives us a 4-week window on either side. So saying week 4 to 12 would be within one standard deviation of where you would expect Kyler Murray to land. Regarding his performance, now, historically, quarterbacks coming off of the ACL don't see a dip in their passing production, and that, of course, is positive news here. However, their rushing production does take a very real hit, and that is something we certainly expect to see with Kyler Murray. The other aspect to think about here is that we commonly hear guys of Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson's stature pointing out that they have to move within the pocket to create the passing lanes that they can't necessarily see over their offensive linemen. And we do wonder a little bit, although we can't really assess it with historical data or any sort of projection, how much is that ability going to be limited, that in-pocket agility to identify and see the throwing lanes? Could that affect Kyler Murray's passing production as well? Although the data doesn't necessarily point that out clearly to us, it is a thought in our head. And again, we don't anticipate much of his rushing production this year. Start of 2024, we expect the full-strength player. And then we have Zach Ertz. Now, he's really hustled back. He anticipates being ready for week 1, and that is a realistic goal based on his timeline of injury. However, the one thing to keep in mind with Zach Ertz, he's getting into his mid-30s, and as a pass catcher, he is likely to see some performance hit. We anticipate that him getting separation when he's returning this early, his quickness, his agility is not all going to be there. So him getting separation on these passing routes is likely where we're going to see the limitation for Zach Ertz, and as a result, we do expect a performance hit for him. And that is all we got for today, so we'll kick it back over.
Always interesting, Payne, because the Seahawks and Pete Carroll's initial interviews were about, Jackson Smith and Jigba, we hope we can have him back by week 1. Maybe he's going to be out a little bit longer. You listen to Deepak break that down. He's not optimistic that Smith and Jigba will be able to contribute at a high level until maybe weeks 5 or even week 6, should Seattle err on the side of the caution and not elect to bring him back before the bye week, given grip strength, a very real concern when you have these wrist injuries.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason we have Deepak on here, is because a lot of the beat writers, a lot of the coaches tend to skew towards ultimate positivity. And so for our premise here with fantasy drafts looming and trying to beat betting markets, getting better information that isn't sunshine and rainbows with pom-poms on is what we achieve to do here for our listeners.
No doubt about it. And Deepak will be with us every Monday throughout the course of the season to fill you in on a lot of the high-profile injuries you may have missed and exactly what the timelines for players' returns may be that have been sidelined from early on in the campaign. But Payne, we've reached the finish line, at least as far as preseason previews are concerned. All 32 teams, if folks happen to miss their favorite team, a team they don't like, want to encourage you guys to go back and listen. You, of course, can follow Payne on X at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there, and most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board. But I have to ask the overarching question, do we have one final best bet to keep folks in action from when toe meets leather on Thursday night next week between the Chiefs and Lions up until we put a bow on the regular season in early January 2024?
Yeah, I want a little revenge. You remember what we did last year on the final preview podcast? We gave out a week 1 teaser.
That we did, and it did not quite go the way the doctor drew it up.
Because the team that went to the NFC Championship game somehow blew a 10-point lead to Justin frigging Fields. So this isn't
Mother
gonna
Nature
be...
didn't smile kindly upon us in that quagmire and that rain-filled football game that had Bears fans clamoring for Super Bowl or bust after the season-opening win against the 49ers. Speaking of which, in a fan base, by the way, apparently you made headlines throughout the Chicagoland area over the weekend, but I digress.
It wasn't anything said on the actual Chicago Bears podcast that we did. It was just something randomly said in passing for 12 seconds on a 90-minute podcast in an unrelated division. I did see that. Okay, getting back to brass
People hang on
here.
your every word,
this
my friend.
This is going to be...
Mr. Insider.
This is going to be quite concise because it's going to be a 2-team 6-point teaser, so it's all about the number. And I think it very much aligns with our vibe of all these previews if you've listened. So the 2-team 6-point teaser, the first team is going to be rotation number 469, the Green Bay Packers. Take it up to +8. We'll call that their number. Shop around. You can get it to 8.5 at a lot of places. The second leg of that teaser actually is the first leg of the teaser because the game is earlier in the day. It's going to be 468. Rotation number. The Washington Commanders. Will take them from like 7.2 down to 1 on that teaser. Very much, again, a fade of the Arizona Cardinals, especially early on in the season as everyone's acclimating to a brand new system that's vastly different than what was implemented there a year ago, along with some of those woes on the defensive side of the ball. So that'll be the 2-team 6-point teaser. Week 1 best bet. Commanders to Packers.
Hey, one final thing before we close up shop here. We will be back on Wednesday. Brad Powers, by the way, did an outstanding...
No, Thursday, the 31st.
Thursday. Throwing a curveball.
Thursday, the 31st.
Look at that, see?
No, it's not a curveball. The podcast schedule was in your inbox.
Yeah, well, I mean, you act like I read every email you send me. I mean, with all that stuff.
Well, I mean, I would have thought, as I was very nice spending my off time creating a schedule that allowed you to frolic.
We've adhered to all of that. I have put my work in this off season.
Printed it out. Put it on the refrigerator.
You gave me last Wednesday off for good behavior. Brad did an outstanding job with week 0, previewing all of those games. So Thursday we'll be back with a college football preview. Of course, you guys know the schedule. You know the games that will get special attention. But want to plead to all of you, our loyal listeners, when we do these podcasts, it is obviously a labor of love. We've gone back into early May to do a lot of these preview shows. We put everything we have into them. So encourage all of you guys that listen to tell your friends, tell your family, expose them to the Bet the Board gospel that's out there, and let them understand that this is one of the best tools for bettors and non-bettors alike when it comes to getting ready for football games each and every weekend throughout the fall. We may say things about your favorite coaches, your favorite teams, your favorite players that you don't like, but it comes from a position of profitability. It's no axe to grind. There's no grudge to be held. Packer fans can attest to that. Over the last couple of years, we flipped our tune as the market has undervalued them. The same thing applies to all of your favorite NFL and college teams. So encourage you guys to share all of that. Make sure that you're interacting with us on social media. We do it for all of you guys, the listeners. And for the 10 years and nearly 600 podcasts we've put forth, a lot of it has been the feedback, and we love interacting with you guys on a day-to-day basis. So excited about the season and what lies ahead when we start to talk about games for real instead of some of the preseason preview stuff that we've been providing. But on that note, Payne, wasn't sure if you had anything else you wanted to get off your chest, or we bid them a fond farewell and reconvene on Thursday for a 2.5-hour breakdown of LSU against Florida State.
8 divisions done and over with. Every single team time-stamped, so you can go back and listen very easily. Appreciate all the listeners. It's go time. We're here. It's
that
official.
It is.
College football week 1, NFL around the corner on the 7th. It's the official grind. No life from now through the Super Bowl.
It's all those extra reps that you've put forth in the weight room to get yourself ready for week 1, to maintain that fitness.
That's why you lift all them weights.
To get everyone to the finish line. But remember, it is a marathon. It is not a sprint. Our goal is to make all of you smarter each and every show that we do, and want to keep those bankrolls in play all the way to the Lombardi Trophy, so you end up on the plus side of the ledger when all of that dust settles. And to get you started in week 1 with the right mindset, obviously played that teaser. Grab it now. Those numbers will be on the move. So with a 2-team 6-point teaser, Green Bay Packers to the Washington Commanders in hand, a week from Sunday, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.